right, looks like everyone's in. So welcome to our first meeting for 2021. And it seems like it's been a long time since we had the holidays, but we haven't seen you for a while. So welcome to our first state and federal directors meeting for this year. And welcome back. I hope you got a little time to rest and relax before you are back hitting the ground running with new things. So I'd like to just remind you, our team is here today and you'll be hearing from all of them. We have Amy Tomomatsu, Rachel Garcia, Evan Bartelheim, Adrian Balcazar, and Jeannie Keith are all with us, and you'll be hearing from each of them later today. And also we have a guest joining us today, Jennifer Kotke, who is our Lakeville homeless consultant, and she's going to be giving us an update on some issues related to homeless services and requirements in that area. Let's move forward and take a look at our agenda for today, or our topics. First of all, last month we talked about the CONAP, but we're going to give you a few more updates, a brief few reminders on that. Again, as I mentioned, Jennifer is going to be talking about homeless education requirements and provide some reminders on that. Adrian will be talking about federal program monitoring and particularly focused on the homeless instrument and the requirements there. We'll be looking at the comprehensive school safety plan and a basic overview of some of those requirements, which is coming due soon. And then we'll have an update on equitable services. We've been getting some questions that are still on the CARES requirements, and also we'll talk about moving forward and where you might be at this point. Then we'll provide a preview of some of the new federal funding that's coming forward, the coronavirus relief funding, and update on that, and update on the LCAP, and some kind of reminders again where you should be and what you should be doing at this point. And then finally an update on SARC, which again is the posting is coming up due very soon. So we wanted to give you a few reminders on that. And then we have a couple other updates, and that should fill our hour. So as usual, we ask you to put your questions in the chat box, and we will respond with a follow-up Q&A to your questions. You always ask really good questions, and we want to make sure we give you clear and detailed responses with references, so you know that you can count on the responses. So put those questions in the chat box, and we will get that out to everyone. All right, and you can find our Q&A from previous Zooms on our webpage, and you will also find a recording of this session and the handouts and anything referenced and the PowerPoint slides on our webpage. So let's take a look. First of all, just a real brief CONAP update. We talked about this last month in December, so we just wanted to give you a few reminders this month. So let's take a look at the next slide. Yeah, okay. So again, we're gonna, a couple things. We reminded you last month of some things you should be thinking about, just a few new reminders, and also we'll be doing a workshop that will go more in depth. So that's why we're just gonna do a brief review here. But the CONAP was released on January 15th, so you should be able to access that. If you did not, then that means if you didn't get notified, that means you're not on the listserv. So you need to go to the CONAP webpage at CDE, sign up for the listserv to make sure you get notifications on that. So it was released, and also you'll find the guidance and the instructions and all the documents you need to get started on that. So it's available, up and ready. The submission date is February 28th, so we're back on our regular timeline for CONAP submission. We have a workshop planned for February 8th. We understand that turns out February is an interesting month with holidays, and our holidays happen to be different dates in some districts. So we know some of you are off that date, but we will be recording that and posting it, and we're also available for any questions you might have. But we will have a workshop. It'll be, we're providing it as we did last year in two parts. Part one on the first shorter section will be for new directors or new people who are new to the CONAP, and some of the just basic information about the application and about the CARS system. And then a page by page will follow that immediately. So that information went out this week. And if you didn't receive it, you can find it on our website and sign up for that. You will know, just a reminder, this report, the winter report, includes your 3 years of fiscal reporting. So it goes back to 2018-19 and also includes 19-20 and 2021 fiscal reports. So you need to make sure that you're in communication with your fiscal office and make sure that they have the required data available to complete those reports. The CARES waivers that we received will impact some of your reporting, particularly, first of all, for 18-19 funds. That period of availability was extended, so you no longer have closeout reports, but you do have reporting available on your available balances. And then it also will affect your Title I carryover. If you've exceeded the carryover, you'll still be required to submit a waiver request through the CONAP. However, if you received one within the last 3 years, typically you wouldn't be eligible. The CARES waiver allows you to still be eligible for that. So again, keep in mind, connect with all the people that need to be completing the application. Someone needs to be assigning roles within the system. So you need to get started on doing that and get organized for the CONAP. Another reminder on that, you're going to be receiving your Title I school allocations. As you know, those change periodically throughout the year for a number of reasons. New funding becomes available or changes in charter schools and such. So your allocations, though, do need to match, your school allocations need to match what's in your school plans. So you need to make sure that your school site councils have dates set to review any changes, make any revisions to the plan, and then also to approve that and make sure that not only the final budget in the plan, but the actions add up to the amount that you're going to have in your CONAP. That's a compliance requirement, and a lot of districts get hit on that one. So make sure you have those school plans updated after you get your allocations. Also, if there are material changes, and again, that's if you have a significant change, usually they'll use a 10% as a rule of thumb, although that's not defined. But you need to take those plans back to the board for approval if you have material differences. So if you get a significant increase or decrease in your allocation, that might necessitate that. All right. The other thing to keep in mind, and we reminded you that this year your Title I has reservations, and those should not be something you're thinking about now. So fingers crossed, you've already planned those, but you will be reporting on your parent engagement reservations. And also, particularly what we're going to look at today are your homeless reservations. And that's why we always invite our homeless liaison here at LACO to join us around this time of year, because we always get questions about what can I do with the homeless reservation, what's required, what's that particularly about. So we've invited Jennifer Kottke and wanted you to hear from her directly. And she's our resident expert on homeless services for homeless youth. And this is an important reservation for a group of students, particularly needy at this time. So we're really pleased to have Jennifer with us today. So I'm going to turn it over to her and let her share with you some information about homeless services. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you, Bonnie, so much. Very excited to be here today and excited to be able to have some conversations. I always saw my Title I directors as super important, sometimes huge advocates for funding when it came to McKinney-Vento. So I have been in this work for about 20 years. If you know Melissa Schoonmaker, she is still around. She's actually promoted to our division director or project director. And so I have been just really graceful enough to be able to fill her shoes. And so took over from her about almost a little over a year and a half ago. So excited to be able to be here with you and talk a little bit about McKinney-Vento. So I did want to talk a little bit about the population and what it encompasses and some stats on this particular population. So if you want to go ahead and move forward, Bonnie, that would be great. I can just talk a little bit about this population as far as numbers are concerned. You can read these slides. I won't spend too much time on them, but I did want to point out that in LA County alone, we run at about 63,000 students across the county that are identified as McKinney-Vento. This number is extremely low, and it has been decreasing over the last couple of years. We are concerned about the decrease. Largely, the state of California has felt that we are under-identifying. So it's really important that districts are working to do everything they can to identify this population. Additionally, COVID has created a lot of barriers for this population. So we do know that there are a high increase of McKinney-Vento students, but that districts are struggling to actually identify this population. So we do expect another decrease, but we have been working with districts and our liaisons across the county in both our charters as well as our districts to ensure that they are identifying. So I'll go ahead and allow you to move forward there. That'd be great. So impact on education when it comes to homelessness can be devastating. In particular, what ends up happening is it's not just necessarily the initial impact, but the residual impact. And so the impact of trauma can be very problematic on the education for these students who are experiencing homelessness and who actually may become housed in the future, but are still dealing with residual trauma. So the stats are very difficult to look at when it comes to the dropout rate. And so it's really important that there are identified staff on every single district that is supporting and serving the student, that it is required both by federal and state. So I'm going to go ahead and ask that you just move forward to the next slide, please. So these are just some of our numbers that are currently in place. The largest population that we have under McKinney-Vento, which I'll give you some definition pieces in just a minute, is 81% of our population is what we consider temporarily doubled up. So they're living with someone else. Largely, these are situations where there is multiple families in single dwelling homes or multiple families in apartments, and they may not necessarily legally be allowed to be there. So it's something to kind of keep in mind. These families are in survival mode. And even though they have a roof over their head, living with multiple can be still problematic, especially when it comes to focusing in on their education. So we've provided you some information about the scope and depth of what we see for students in homelessness as far as grades are concerned, their actual physical grades. One of the things we always note, it is very difficult to obtain numbers tied to our 0 to 3 in our pre-K population, largely because the only groups that report on those are LEAs that have in LEA preschool programs and our Head Start programs. So it is very difficult to get that population. We just do also note that we have 80 schools that we deal with, 80 districts that we deal with, and over 372 charter schools. So we do have a lot of support that we provide for technical assistance across the county. So we can go ahead and move forward to the next slide. So we just remind that what the law says related to McKinney-Vento, that McKinney-Vento is a federal mandate, but there are also state protections. There are laws under California state that protect this population as well. And all homeless children are entitled to the same free and appropriate public education that's provided to their non-homeless, then they're what we call their housed peers, or to non-homeless students. And the schools are required to remove barriers to enrollment, attendance, and academic success for this particular population. And every district and charter is required to designate a homeless liaison to address the educational needs of these students. So it's not an option, it is a requirement. And we always just remind it's every district and charter, it's not every school site. We advocate for sites, but that's not something we can mandate. So, but every school and charter must have at least a designated homeless liaison. So you can go ahead and move forward there. So just a definition reminder of what a homeless student is. is that they lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residency. There are a number of situations that you can see down here below, such as doubling up, living in motels or hotels, emergency and transitional shelters, public or private places not designated for humans to live. That could be like a converted garage, or even not a converted garage, just a garage, which is not meant for human habitation. Living in cars, parks, train stations, or similar settings. And then also we have a unaccompanied homeless population, which is also part of this definition as well. So, and then we cover ages 0 to 22 underneath McKinney-Vento, 22 being the fact that we serve and support early Head Start, and we go all the way through special education service provisions. So I'll let you go ahead and push forward there. So the liaison has many, many responsibilities. You can take a look at these. These are actually all codified in the law. And so it's just a real emphasis too on identification. That's one of the big pieces for our liaisons, is to identify and then to support and serve. And it's really important that liaisons are given sufficient time to actually receive professional development themselves, as well as be able to provide professional development to others. So I'll go ahead and push forward there. So different charters and districts do different things as far as creating their programs, but we actually encourage it not just necessarily be a service, but rather it be a program. And so that it be holistic in nature, and that there be many, many different tandems or different services that are being provided for this particular population. So it's not a matter of just we hand them maybe clothing for uniform related pieces, but that you're actually looking at a larger depth and breadth program that actually supports these students. So you can go ahead and push forward. And then also just talking a little bit about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which includes Title I, Part A. So one of the things we just always remind is that there was the reauthorization for under ESSA, or Every Student Succeeds Act, and that really strengthened the provisions for students. This occurring in 2015. There was some revisions when it all kind of fleshed out, but the revisions for this population still remain strong underneath the current ESSA provisions. So again, it doesn't include specific requirements for collaborating with McKinney-Vento programs to serve and support youth, and then making sure that to provide financial assistance through, and I know we don't necessarily have SEAs per se in the state of California. I know we have county offices, but there is money that needs to be coming through to serve and support this population, which falls under the Title I, Part A. So I'll go ahead and let you push forward there. So Title I and homeless, it's really critically important that you are coordinating with your liaison. The liaison sometimes has information that you may need in order to complete certain things. And so it's also important to be able to describe the services provided to McKinney-Vento students, including with reservation funds to support their enrollment, attendance, and success. So it's important to understand how your liaison is serving, what they're doing, and then how your Title I funding is being used for this particular population. So McKinney-Vento students attending any school in the LEA are automatically eligible for Title I-A services. The local plan should describe the method used for determining the amount of funds reserved for students experiencing homelessness, how the amount was determined, and then how the liaison was involved in determining the amount. And I can't stress enough the importance of collaborating with your liaison, and that will flesh out a little bit more here as we talk about the CARS that has come into place. So I'll go ahead and let you push forward here. So under the ESSA provisions, all LEAs that receive Title I Part A must set aside funds for this particular population, and the amount must be based on the total LEA allocation prior to expenditures or transfers. Amounts may be determined based on a needs assessment and should involve the liaison. So a lot of our liaisons do conduct needs assessments, and they also use something called the school housing questionnaire. to obtain data. And so that data is supposed to be placed within their within a district or charter's CalPads. And so they are actively always capturing numbers, even beyond the date for the October through December deadline in CalPads. They are still continuing to collect names of students who are impacted by homelessness. So again, it's important to continue to connect with your liaison to ensure that you have the most updated information on numbers. And that does impact eventually the Title I. It may not impact this year, but it will impact the following year. So funds may be used for services not originally provided to other students. It can help with transportation to school of origin and to help fund your liaison. And for educationally related support, it can include your pre-K students. So you can go ahead and push forward. So some of the typical funding options for McKinney-Vento students is obviously the Title I funds reservation set aside. There are also districts, and we're actually in the process of applying right now for the EHCY funding, or what we call the McKinney-Vento grant. It's really important to know that this is a competitive grant. The documents are due by districts by February 4th to the California Department of Education. And this grant is, as I mentioned, is highly competitive. And only right now, about 10 of our LEAs in Los Angeles County have this funding. So it's not everybody gets EHCY funding. And so that's why they'll need to lean back in on their Title I fund reservation set aside. The other place that students can be supported under McKinney-Vento is under the local control funding formula, the LCFF. So not all McKinney-Vento students aren't called out in LCFF. They fall under your low socioeconomic population, and they can be supported under that. So, and then there's also districts I know and LEAs and charters also oftentimes will look at and apply for other grant funding sources to support this particular population. So go ahead and move forward. So these are approved expenditures for the reservation. And I do have another cheat sheet from the California Department of Education that would be helpful in looking at the reservation approved. I'll send that over to Bonnie's staff and they can post that for you if you need that. One of the things that we are seeing in particular under COVID right now is there is an emergency expenditure piece underneath the reservation expenditures that are allowed. And a lot of our districts and our LEAs and our charters are using the emergency clause to purchase food due to a lot of food instability. So one of the things, and I'll let you go ahead and move forward, Bonnie, to the next slide. One of the things they cannot use this funding for is rental assistance for any kind. I know it is a temptation right now to try to support families because our Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority is highly impacted, and they basically have been limiting the number of families and children they can help. And so a lot of our families are experiencing homelessness and maybe even for the first time. And there is very little support right now in the housing realm inside of Los Angeles County. And so districts have wanted to be able to figure out how to pay for hotels or help with rental assistance, but this is not an appropriate way to spend this particular reservation. We also just have reminded districts to be very careful about what they spend their funding on. In particular, if it's not sustainable, such as we've had a family request the purchase of a generator for their motorhome. The problem is with that is that, yes, it may power up their laptop, but if you have multiple families coming to you to request generators, you will not be able to sustain the purchasing of generators for multiple families. So we just really encourage districts to think through and LEAs to think through when they purchase products, if it's a sustainable avenue of purchasing. So we always advocate for things like uniforms, things like and allowable expenses, but things that will remove barriers, things for projects, And all of that is very strange right now under COVID. So actually purchasing products for this population is a little bit strange right now. So just some other pieces, again, is not providing assistance for clothing assistance for parents. This funding is set aside for our students. Also, this funding cannot pay for physical exams to participate in sports. And it can't pay for costs for things like prom dresses, sports, physicals, or yearbooks. So we have had districts who have worked with donors who will help to pay for these items. And we always advocate for that, but our reservation cannot pay for costs for prom dresses, sports, physicals, or yearbooks. So a liaison within a district may want to work with outside entities and sponsors to help pay for those particular items. So go ahead and move forward. So one of the things that we have been experiencing on the side of the liaisons is that there is the CARS report, which I know many of you are very familiar with. A lot of liaisons are not necessarily very familiar with it. So we have been doing some education with them about making sure that they understand to connect with their Title I staff, largely because what has happened is last year, there wasn't necessarily always good communication in LEAs between Title I staff and liaisons. And so when the CARS report came up, there is a series of questions that are asked about homeless board policies, about the usage of funds, and about training. And so sometimes the Title I staff marked that these pieces were not occurring when the liaison actually was doing them. So before you respond to your CARS, I would just encourage you to take some time to talk to your liaison to check with them. So I know that due in February, February 2021, is the homeless reservation is required. The reservation funds for homeless education needs to be indicated, and the amount is due on the winter release. So you might want to check with your liaison before you just submit that. The reason I say that is because you want to ensure that it's enough funding to support students. So as I sat in the district, I had over 3,500 students. My Title I allocation worked out to about $30 per student. And so that could buy me maybe a backpack and some cheap shoes and maybe some school supplies one time a year. And so that may not necessarily be very adequate for a population. So it's really important to understand what the reservation that you're setting aside and whether it can support that homeless student population. So for spring of 2021, and I'm sure you're aware, there's a series of questions that will be asked. And so again, that has to do with responding as to whether homeless education board policies are updated. I did talk to the California Department of Education. They mentioned that board policies for homeless education need to at least be updated to post ESSA, so post that 2015. If they're more current than that, that's great, but they at least need to be updated by the 2015 ESSA. There has not been any really new regulations for homeless education that have been put into legislation currently. So, and since 2015, there hasn't been any new legislation that's out there. The question regarding the Title I, responding to the question how the LEA uses the Title I, that's really important. You want to talk to your liaison about how they are needing to use that. And then also responding to the question is, has the LEA trained all of their staff? And that's a really important one. The other tool I will give to you, as I'll send to Bonnie's staff, is a series of webinars that are occurring that the California Department of Education is putting on to help staff, help the liaison train all staff. So they need to be training anybody who's coming in contact with students who are homeless. So, and then I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide there. So Title I and homeless, again, these are just ways to collaborate on the consolidated application, your CARS, your Title I ranking, how to support schools, definitely on your budget development. FPM, I know Bonnie's going to be talking a little bit about that, I think later on, but the FPM can be daunting a bit to a liaison. And so working with them to make sure you're collaborating with your liaison and gathering information from them. They may have a lot of information to help with that process. annual surveys, and then also audits. So go ahead and push forward there. And then basically, I'll just wrap it up with a big thank you. You're welcome to reach out to me at any time. My contact information is here. And I would love to be able to connect with anybody that has any questions. And I know there are questions, and I believe Bonnie staff will be fielding those, and I'll be responding to those at a later point in time. So I'd like to thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing this information on the Homeless Education Program. Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. This, Homeless Education Program is so important, as I said, because your families may be experiencing homelessness for the very first time, and it's really important that all your school personnel be aware of how to help these students and what services are available. Today, we're going to take a deeper look into the Homeless Education FPM instrument, and also I'll give you a quick update on the 2021 FPM reviews as well as the 21-22 upcoming FPM reviews. So here you see the Homeless Education Instrument. There are 17 items that are included for review. You can see that it includes board policies, as Jennifer explained, and administrative regulations, the duties of your liaison, the coordination with outside agencies, your staff development that's provided, the procedures in your outreach to the families, and the actual services that are provided for education support. You will also see some overlap in some items that when you have your other FPM reviews, such as the SARC, time and effort reporting, and equipment inventory. When looking at the actual evidence, you want to make sure that you look at the policies and procedures that you have in place. They should support and facilitate the legal requirements of the program, so that if you are selected for an FPM, it's just a matter of collecting the evidence that you already have. And remember, this evidence that you are required to have is just to validate the implementation of your program. So here we see a broad collection of evidence that's requested within the Homeless Education Instrument, such as the board policies, letters and notices to parents, a sample of your student level tracking system. Remember that it's also extremely important that your homeless liaison is not only aware of the homeless program requirements, but knows what evidence is required in order to validate the implementation of your program. So does your liaison know how and where to keep their agendas and minutes of their meetings, their professional development records, all the necessary forms and posters, flyers, and brochures? What about all the referrals given to homeless families and children, especially during the pandemic? And are they aware of the district's procedures for time and effort and equipment inventory? So these are just some of the main items that are requested as evidence. And so it's important that all of you take a closer look at the Homeless Education Instrument, because again, due to the pandemic, we want to make sure that we are not just being in compliance, but really looking at the needs of all of our students and families, because this is so prevalent during this time of the pandemic. So now let's take a look at a quick update on the current FPM reviews. We know that they are continuing in the telemonitoring virtual format, and that will continue throughout June to all the reviews that are scheduled. Remember that during this telemonitoring format, that communication is critical between your district and charter and the CDE's FPM lead, as well as each of the program reviewers. It's very critical. Also, the CDE has informed us that there are still 15 LA County LEAs and charters that have unresolved FPM items from previous reviews that have taken place all the way back from 2015 school year, all the way up and through the 2020 school year, or the calendar date of 2020. So these are districts that have unresolved that are in the 2020 are beyond the 90-day allowance. So the CDE has asked our team to assist any of these LEAs and charters in finding out what's going on, what's the status of resolving these FPM findings. So just be aware, we might be reaching out to some of you if you are on that list. So it doesn't go away. So now let's take a look at the 21-22 FPM selections and the reviews that are coming up. Right now, the status is on the program instruments. CDE is currently revising the 20 program instruments for the upcoming next year's FPM reviews. Also note, they are creating a new instrument, which is going to be focusing on your Title IV Part A program. So all of you, when that comes out, we will definitely be spotlighting and sharing on this new instrument. For selections, CDE is looking for Cycle B, which is going to be slated as online reviews, and Cycle D for on-site reviews. So if you know which cohort you're part of, you'll know what you're looking at if you're on that in that cohort. Remember, CDE looks at risk factors of LEAs, charters, and county offices to determine which district, charter, or county office and what programs will be reviewed during, for online and on-site. And just so you know, they did say they are planning to identify these Cycle B and Cycle D as online reviews and traditionally on-site. But again, as the pandemic, moves forward, if indeed we're still in these similar situations and circumstances, they would revert back to the telemonitoring, but they are going to plan for next year to have the reviews be conducted online for Cycle B and on-site for Cycle D. And they plan to identify these LEAs for, for the 21-22 FPM reviews in mid-March. So just know that districts will be identified and they will be reaching out sometime. They're hoping to have it all done by mid-March. In terms of training for next year, they are looking at, based on the feedback, they really found that having a virtual FPM training, they really did miss the interaction, the human interaction. They said that they really enjoy creating the networking and the relationships and putting a face to people ahead of time in supporting them. But they felt that with the feedback they received, that this actually was better for participants to have it in a virtual format, not only because you could attend all of them without leaving your place of employment or even your living room, but also the accessibility for more people. When we do provide these on-site trainings, we are limited to, the fire department and the number of human beings that can be placed in these settings. So having them virtually is actually easy for people to participate, as well as it allows people that aren't being reviewed to access it as well, so that you just get the latest and greatest information. So again, the reviews, they're planning to have them in the format of online and on-site to begin in September of 2021. And more information will be forthcoming once we have more information. So that's it for FPM for this year and for next year. So now I will pass it on to the Comprehensive School Safety Plan.
Thank you, Adrienne. Good morning, everyone. So we've been getting some questions about the Comprehensive School Safety Plan. So we just wanted to provide a brief overview of some of the key requirements. Next slide, please. So requirements for the Comprehensive School Safety Plans are specified in Education Code sections 32280 through 32289. And some of these key requirements include that all school staff must be trained on the components of the safety plan, and also that the plan must be written and developed by the school site council. Now, the school site council also has the option to delegate this responsibility to a safety planning committee if the committee meets certain composition requirements that are specified in Ed Code. And so this would include the principal or his or her designee, one teacher who is a representative of the certificated employee organization, one parent whose child attends the school, one classified employee who is a representative of the classified employee organization, and other members may be included if desired. Another important requirement is that during the writing and development of the plan, the school site council or the safety planning committee must consult with the representative from a law enforcement agency, a fire department, and other first responder entities. Additionally, any updates to the plan must be shared with these entities as well. And per education code, law enforcement agencies could include school district police and security departments for the purposes of this plan. And just wanted to note that the requirement to consult with the fire department and other first responder entities, in addition to law enforcement agencies, became effective in January 2019 through Assembly Bill 1747. Next slide, please. So there are many required components that must be included in the plan, as well as some components that are encouraged per education code. And so all of these required and encouraged components are spelled out in the education code. And so everything listed on this slide falls under the required components. It's really important for LEAs and schools to become familiar with all of the sections of the education code related to the comprehensive safety plans because there are so many components. And so just to name a few, the plan must include an assessment of the current status of school crime committed on the campus and at school-related functions. And so this could include a review of data such as office referrals, suspension or expulsion data, attendance rates, or SARB data. Other things that must be include child abuse reporting procedures, disaster procedures, suspension and expulsion policies and procedures, as well as procedures to notify teachers of dangerous pupils. Next slide, please. As far as the timeline for the safety plan, schools must update and adopt the plan by March 1st of every year. And the school site council or safety planning committee must also present the plan at a public meeting at the school site prior to adoption of the plan. And this is to allow for public opinion regarding the plan. There are also specific notification requirements in Ed Code that specify that the school site council or the safety planning committee must notify in writing the persons and entities listed on the slide, if available, of the public meeting. The school safety plan must also be submitted to the school district for approval. And there's no specific deadline in statute for the school district to approve the plan. However, the CDE recommends that plans be approved by the district within a month of school approval or as soon as possible. School districts or county offices must also annually notify the CDE by October 15th of any schools that have not complied with the school safety plan requirements that are specified in Ed Code. It's also important to note that the comprehensive school safety plans are also part of the annual audit process. So it's important for LEAs to have a process in place to ensure that its schools annually review, update, and adopt a comprehensive school safety plan by March 1st, as well as a process for submitting the plan to the district for approval. Next slide, please. So the CDE has created a comprehensive school safety plan tool to assist schools in developing and updating school safety plans. And so here's a screenshot of the first 2 pages of the tool, as well as a link to the document. And we'll also post this document with our materials on our webpage. And so the checklist tool includes the school safety plan requirements, as well as some suggestions and resources for some components of the plan. Next slide, please. This slide provides some additional resources to support this work, including the links to the CDE Safe Schools Planning webpage and a CDE School Safety Plan reminder letter from a few years ago. And this letter includes additional links and resources. If your LEA needs additional support and guidance with comprehensive school safety plans, you may also contact Susan Chidas with the Community Health and Safe Schools Unit here at LACO. And I will now turn it over to Bonnie.
Thanks, Jill. All right, next we're going to take just a brief look at services requirements. We've been continuing to get questions about the requirements, particularly around the CARES Act funds. And it's understandable that there are questions out there since there's been so much confusion and conflicting information since this first came out last year. But now things are settled, so we just want to briefly review what the requirements are. And we also want to give you a heads up on some things to consider for the coming year. So let's take a look at the next slide. And first of all, just to review, CARES Act funds equitable services requirements only apply to two funding sources under CARES, that's ESSER and the GEAR funds. That's important to keep in mind because the learning loss mitigation funds include multiple fund sources, but only in that cluster are the GEAR funds subject to the equitable services requirements. All right. On October 9th of 2020, a U.S. Department of Education issued what is the third document providing guidance for the use of those funds and how those funds should be calculated. The October guidance addressed a number of the final requirements as they kind of ended up after a number of lawsuits. So there were three documents. The first one, as you can recall, that came out early, indicated that LEAs needed to determine the equitable share based on total enrollment. And then there was pushback on that and some lawsuits that started. And so a second document came out, which was moving toward the form of regulations, which indicated you could choose to use total enrollment or low income, but put some restrictions on districts if they used the low income numbers. And then again, there were continued to be multiple lawsuits from the states and from various organizations, and resulting in the final guidance, which indicated that you can use, and that's what you should use, is the low income numbers in the manner of Title I, which is what is stated in the law. And the guidance clarifies what this means in terms of the equitable share, and that it's based on the number of low income students attending private schools who reside in Title I school attendance areas. So let's take a look at some of the language from the document. So again, this is from the guidance, and you can see here it clarifies what in the same manner as Title I means, and this will look very familiar to you. You need to calculate the equitable share for CARES Act funds based on the number of children age 5 through 17, okay, because that's how Title I is collected, who are low income, from low income families, so you need a low income poverty measure, who reside in a participating Title I public school attendance area. And you should recognize that as the same as how we determine the equitable share for Title I programs. So that is clearly from the guidance. And it goes on the next slide to provide some additional clarification. This is one of the Q&As, and they ask, what do you base that on? And it clarifies that you determine that amount prior to making any reservations. So before you pull any reservations off for parent engagement, for administrative costs, and before you allocate the funds to schools, And again, this is the same as how we allocate Title I equitable services share. So prior to making it, it's off the total allocation off the top. All right. Next, we'll look at what data are used. And again, it addresses this, and the guidance provides an option for which poverty data you use. So it allows districts to use last year's numbers, because you should have already collected your Title I numbers for your schools. So if the same schools are participating, then you could use your 1920 Title I numbers. However, you can also use new numbers for 2021, which might be if you have new schools coming in. So it does provide you an option, and this was to facilitate the funds getting out in a timely manner and not having to do a double count. So again, same criteria: low-income students attending private schools who live in the attendance area of your Title I schools would generate those funds using either 1920 or 2021 numbers. All right. The guidance also provides on the next slide a chart that gives you an example of what that might look like. So if your public school had 85% of the low-income students, when you put your public and private together, public school had 85% of them, the non-public had 15% of those students, then you would determine the equitable share for GEAR and for ESSER based on those percentages. Next slide. All right, so let's take a look at moving forward. And Amy's going to talk to you next a little bit more about the new COVID relief funding that just passed last month, I believe it was. It does include support for private schools, but it does that differently than under the CARES Act. ESSER funds are continued under this program. However, they are not subject to the equitable services requirement under the new law. Let me just read to you. There's a new program in this act. It's called the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools Program. And it's included as part of the what is going to be now GEAR continued, the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Funds. And based on this, there's not an equitable services, there's this separate grant. And let me read from you from the guidance. It kind of helps clarify how they're moving this, and I think in a direction that will make it much easier for districts. They say, by creating a separate reservation of funds for this purpose, Congress reiterated the need for non-public schools to participate in emergency education relief programs by establishing a separate program under GEAR, rather than relying on the equitable services requirements that typically apply to elementary and secondary formula grant programs. So they pulled that out and made it a separate grant program. States will need to apply for these funds separately, and it will be administered by the state education agency, which in California is CDE. So CDE now has the responsibility for administering under the new program these services for private schools under the funding, this emergency assistance to non-public schools program under the new funding program that just came out. So I think that will be help make things move more efficiently, and will also be good news for many of you out there. All right, so let's take a look at just some heads up moving forward. And this is by way of getting your ducks in a row, okay? We're suggesting it's time to start thinking about 2020. Oh my gosh, I did it too. I was saying 21-22 consultation. My gosh, it's hard to say that. We're looking at, you need to start making plans now to begin consultation. We always say you need to begin early. And the question be, why do you need to begin so early? Well, first of all, districts are required to provide consultation for equitable services under ESSA. Now we're talking about ESSA. not CARES, just your regular programs that you Title I, II, III, and IV. The law requires consultation in a timely and meaningful manner, and often complaints arise when private schools don't believe that it's timely. So you need to get that out early. Reasons: some private schools are slow to respond. I think you've had that experience. You send letter after letter, you try and call and you don't get any response. So one reason to start early. You need to maintain documentation of multiple attempts to reach out. Saying I called them and they didn't respond, or I sent a letter isn't enough. You need to show multiple attempts. So that's why beginning early is a good idea. And consultation needs to take place prior to making any decisions that affect the services to private schools. So if your district is considering applying or not applying for particular funds, then that consultation needs to take place. Prior to that, it's still the district decision, but you need to consult with the private schools prior to making that decision to accept or not accept a funding source. So some reasons to start thinking about that early. So just about where can you start and what can you be doing now? Well, first of all, identify your eligible nonprofit private schools in the district boundaries. Again, only nonprofit private schools are eligible, but you might want to check that list, see if you have any new schools that you haven't worked with before. That might require more time and more education with those schools as to the programs. You need to start thinking about communication that you're going to have, your letters, getting those together, looking at timelines for consultation, for meetings that you might have, and your process for outreach and establishing a consultation process. And also you need to then consider how you're going to be contacting schools outside your district boundaries. Do you know of schools that you've had before? How do you do that? How do you ensure you're having that outreach to schools outside the district boundaries? And then you next want to look at the ESSA programs that the district's participating in that require equitable services, and determine how your consultation can be coordinated among those programs. If you do all the programs, then you have less of a problem. But if you have multiple staff and administrators in your district administering Title I, II, III, and IV, how can you coordinate that so you're sending out a common message and working together in terms of consulting about those programs and meeting all the requirements? So those are just a few things to think about now for your regular 21-22 equitable services program, but it's not too early to think about it. And we'll be providing an equitable services workshop within probably the next month or so. So we'll make sure that information gets out to you. We do also have an equitable services handbook that is available that provides you some guidance, and you can find that on our website also. So now I'm going to turn it over to Amy, who's going to look at the new funding that we just touched on briefly relative to private schools, but she's going to give you an update on the bigger picture of that. Amy?
Thank you, Bonnie. Yes, we're going to share some information from the most recent federal COVID relief acts. Next slide, please. So former President Trump signed the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, CRSSA, into law in December, and that provided for about $82 million for education. You can see the breakdown of those $82 million, with the largest chunk being for the Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Fund, which we call ESSER. And ESSER was also part of the CARES Act, so we're now calling this second round ESSER 2. Another point of interest from the CRSSA was the extension of the Coronavirus Relief Fund. We sometimes refer to that one as CRF, which extended the federal deadline from December 2020 to December 2021. So this is a federal level extension. I know that LEAs were very busy trying to work out all their expenditures to have them spent by December 30th, which has now come and gone. But before we knew that this was going to be extended, those timelines kind of passed us by. So we're going to take a look at the next slide of what this means for the state of California. So CRSSA's ESSER 2 fund for California would be about $6.8 billion. And to put that into perspective, California received nearly 1.65 billion in the first round of ESSER funding. So this for ESSER 2, the state's getting about 4 times more funding than that first round. And I believe that School Services of California put out something in one of their fiscal reports that provides LEAs with a mechanism for looking at a preliminary estimate. So we don't have any official final numbers from CDE, but that was one place where we saw preliminaries available to look at. The allowable uses for this ESSER 2 funding will be the same as the first round with 2 additions that they added: school facility repairs and improvements that would reduce the risk of virus transmission and exposure to health hazards, and the inspection, testing, maintenance, repair, replacement, and upgrade projects to improve the indoor air quality in school facilities. So those are 2 additional allowable uses that they specified for ESSER 2 in addition to the previously bulleted items that we saw as allowable uses for ESSER 1. Also note the period of availability on these funds may also be used on pre-award costs dating back to March 13th, 2020. This is the date on which the national emergency was declared. And as Bonnie stated earlier, there is no equitable service requirement on ESSER 2. And private schools would have that opportunity for funding through the Gear 2 instead. The Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, they posted a document that provides a side-by-side comparison of different features of ESSER 1 from CARES and ESSER 2 from the CRSSA. And so that's what that link will take you to that you see on this slide. As for the extension of the coronavirus relief funds that came from the CARES Act, if the state adopts the governor's recently released budget proposal, LEAs in California would have until May 31st. So note that's different from the December 31st deadline, federal deadline. So LEAs would have until May 31st to use any unspent CRF dollars. And by establishing that May 31st, 2021 deadline, LEAs would, that gives the State Department of Finance time to sweep any unspent dollars from LEAs so that they can use those funds for other state needs prior to the December 2021 federal deadline. So just gives them that opportunity to have a few months to figure out what to do with anything that LEAs were unable to finish expending. Districts that need the additional time beyond that original December 2020 deadline that just passed would need to certify by March 1st, 2021, that remaining CRF amounts will be used in compliance with federal law by the May 31st deadline. We don't know what the certification looks like or this process, but these are just some general notes that we have seen provided. Next slide. So this is a screenshot from the governor's budget summary for 2021-22, and it shows us the comparison of the total nationwide funds compared to the portion for California. That first line that's labeled primary and secondary is the ESSER 2 funding source, and the link to the entire budget summary is also included below on this slide. The section on K-12 education starts on page 57 of the proposal, and it includes a summary of other grants that you may have heard of, such as the in-person instruction grant, the extended learning time and academic intervention grants, and other funding and policy issues related to K-12 education. As more details emerge, we'll plan on sharing relevant details with this group, but for those of you who haven't had a chance to review, we want to provide that link for you as well. And on the last slide for my section here, one additional resource that we thought we'd share today is tied to the state's new Safe Schools for All hub. This is a website that was developed with the intent of consolidating all the resources and information related to COVID-19 and schools. So they want to create a one-stop shop for our school districts as well as the community. So here you can find the latest guidance for reopening for in-person instruction, as well as the COVID-19 safety plan school guidance checklist, which is connected as one of the application pieces for the upcoming in-person instruction grants that we saw in that budget summary. So You may have heard about this somewhat, and so this, if you haven't seen the Safe Schools for All Hub, this is a good place to start for more information. And that takes us next to the next topic on the agenda, which is the LCAP update. So I'll turn it over to Jeannie. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Amy, and good morning, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well. So LCAP update, I'm going to go quickly because we're running a little bit behind schedule. Can we go to the next slide, please? So today I'm going to provide some of the updated tools from the CDE and address some of the trainings available to support LEAs with their LCAP process, and provide some time for reflection on stakeholder engagement in the LCAP process. So the CDE has made available the LCAP template and instructions to be used with the development of this year's LCAP plan. And the link is on the slide to access that template and instructions, as well as the accompanying expenditure tables. Both are available for download. And the CDE has will be posting the annual update template and instructions to be used in the development of the 2021-22 LCAP. These will be approved by the state board, by the executive director of the state board by January. And as soon as they are available, CDE will send out an announcement via the LCFF listserv. And be reminded that this year, the annual update will be addressing the 2019-20 LCAP, as well as the 2020-21 Learning Continuity Plan. So that template will be forthcoming by January 31st. All right, next slide, please. Here is a summary of the CDE's webinar series, and you can see they have a quite a comprehensive webinar series. It started this Tuesday with the local control funding formula 101, and you can see listed on the slide the additional topics that are going to be addressed. They're all 1-hour sessions except for the February 2nd session, which will address the LCAP and annual update templates, and that shows it's for 1.5 hours. You can register at the link on the CDE website, or you can search for Tuesdays at 2 on the CDE website and find that registration link. And you can register for the Tuesday section in one block and the Thursday section in another block. So you don't have to register 8 times, just 2 times, one for Tuesday and one for Thursday. Next slide, please. I want to just reflect on stakeholder engagement today. And this slide is a reminder to us that in the instructions for the LCAP template, meaningful stakeholder engagement is addressed at the very beginning in the introduction section, where the instructions set the stage for all of the sections in the template. And take a moment to look at the 3 principles noted from the introduction. Keeping these 3 principles in mind, LEAs will be providing a summary of their stakeholder engagement process and how stakeholder engagement was considered before finalizing the LCAP. They'll also be providing in the LCAP a summary of the feedback from required from specific stakeholder groups, and a description of the aspects of the LCAP that were influenced by specific stakeholder engagement. So keeping in mind the principles that are noted in the beginning of the instructions, each of these sections should reflect how the LEA seeks and uses meaningful input from their stakeholders to inform LCAP development. The next slide provides a screenshot that may look familiar to many of you. This is a screenshot from our summary of legal requirements. And here, this summarizes the instructions and requirements for stakeholder engagement and shows the required groups for consultation, the requirement for engaging parent advisory committees, and the requirements for engaging the public and the advisory committees, specifically during the board approval process or board adoption process. These requirements are all addressed in the instructions and need to be addressed in the 3 prompts that we just looked at on the previous slide. And so it's important to note that while the template is updated to reflect the new 3-year timeline, it's the same template that was approved in last January, and the LCFF requirements for engaging stakeholders are continuing requirements. There's not change to those requirements. So it's important that we all have an understanding of the importance of meaningfully engaging stakeholders and the requirements connected to this section in the plan. Next slide, please. It might be helpful to map out the LEA's process for engaging stakeholders. Here's a timeline that provides a visual that might assist your LEA to reflect on their annual process for engaging stakeholders. And within this timeline, it's looking at the development phase, the time you're taking to develop and plan for what you're going to include in the LCAP, and the phase for the adoption of the LCAP. LEAs know that to consult with required stakeholder groups and parent advisory committees in a meaningful way requires planning for how and when the engagement will occur, and determining overall how this is part of a coherent, ongoing annual LCAP process. So it's important for LEAs to determine their process for consulting with all required stakeholder groups. What is their process for learning from stakeholders about the needs of all student groups and understanding the unique needs, conditions, and circumstances of English learners, low income, and foster youth? What is the process for supporting understanding of data and reflection in the annual update process, and engaging stakeholders to have an understanding of that data, and then using their input in writing and determining what are the priorities to include in the content in the LCAP. And then additionally, what is the timeline for the adoption phase? Keeping in mind that there are the requirements for sharing the LCAP draft prior to adoption with the Parent Advisory Committee and English Learner Parent Advisory Committee, and providing time for the superintendent to respond in writing to their comments, as well as the requirements to solicit public input at the public hearing, and the requirement to adopt the LCAP, the budget, and report on local indicators at a public meeting. Okay, so keeping this timeline in mind can help an LEA to plan out and map out what their process is going to be. And if you start with your board approval date, what's your projected date for board approval of the LCAP, the budget, and the report on local indicators, because remember that all happens together. The LEA can then map backwards to calendar times to share the drafts with the required advisory committee, okay, and to provide opportunities for the public input. So hopefully this timeline might be helpful in your reflection on your stakeholder engagement process. Next slide. This slide provides some of the upcoming LCFF LCAP trainings. Our office will be providing a nuts and bolts for LCFF, LCAP, and the annual update. And we're tentatively planning that for Friday, the 5th of February. We'll be sending out a notification. We'll also be providing a workshop on understanding increased or improved services, the increased or improved services for unduplicated pupils, and reaching out to each of our districts to provide customized support for district teams and continuing with our pre-review process. And I've also noted on the slide, of course, the Tuesday, Thursday webinar series. So there's multiple opportunities for some training for LEA teams to engage during their LCAP planning. On the last slide, I think this is the last slide, I want to provide a quick update about the eLCAP and some key points to note are some LEAs had started their annual update for the 1920 LCAP in the eLCAP system. That access is still available for LEAs who may have entered information in for the annual update. And we'll work with you to determine how you can best use that moving forward. Second is that the LCAP template for the 2021-22 LCAP, for preparing the LCAP for next year, will be released soon on eLCAP. And right now, updates are being made in the eLCAP system to reflect the new 3-year cycle. So those same changes that were made in the template that's posted on the CDE website will also be reflected in the eLCAP. And as soon as CDE releases the template for the annual update for the 1920 LCAP and the learning continuity plan, we will incorporate that into the eLCAP. And then will be multiple opportunities for training for the eLCAP, and some of those will be provided through LCAP trainings, our state and federal program directors meetings, written communication to the listserv, and as well as personalized support from our office. So we're here to assist you with eLCAP, and as always, to encourage you to use that, that system. And I think that is it for me, and we're turning it over to Evan to address the school accountability report card update.
Thanks, Jeannie. Yeah, I'm good. Yes, I'm going to give a quick update, not just on the SARC, but also on the LARC and the STARC. So I probably should have a poem, but I didn't have time. Next slide, please. So just a quick reminder, there's some accountability deadlines coming up. The deadline to update and publish the school accountability report card, which is a state requirement, is February 1st, 2021. And your SARC reports are posted in either of one of two methods. You could use both will be using the CDE SARC online portal. So either you'll be submitting the SARC report via the web application, so you're using the state's SARC web portal, or you'll upload an accurate URL to the website address where the SARC is posted on your school or LEA website. So for those of you who may be using document tracking services or another vendor to generate your SARC, you'll want to make sure you still have to load your URL. Also, there's a deadline upcoming for LEAs to update the LEA accountability report card, and that's March 1st, 2021. And I'm going to speak to this a little bit later. There was a letter that was sent to each LEA in November that provided a unique access code and website address to report data for a new feature of the LARC, which is the per pupil expenditure. It may not have gone to you, but we've had a few questions about it. So I'm going to give you more information in just a second, and so you'll know what to look for, and that you can confirm that somebody is acting on it if it's not you. Next slide, please. So there have been some updates to the SARC based on legislation passed in response to the COVID pandemic that relate to the state and federal accountability tables. So first, Executive Order N3020, which was issued and waived last spring, waived the requirement for academic testing, as you know, for math, English language arts, and science for the 1920 school year. Also, Executive Order N5620 was issued, and that waived the requirement to administer the physical fitness performance tests and to report the test results for the 1920 school year. So those will not be reported in the SARC, and since most people are, most LEAs are using an auto-populating feature, either through the CDE's SARC website or the vendor like DTS, that information will appear as NA. That'll be automatically populated for you. Next slide, please. The CDE has also announced several updates to the SARC system moving forward, and I'd like to discuss some of those. First, there's a new SARC user account registration process. Hopefully this will make it a little bit easier to gain access. Each superintendent, direct funded charter administrator, and MPS school administrator will register on the SARC user account registration process, and after which they can immediately obtain a unique secure user account. And then using that unique secure user account, they can immediately log on to the SARC web application and create additional user accounts for designated SARC coordinators or school site representatives. So the process uses a secure self-identifying process. So if you are identified as a superintendent or direct funded charter or school administrator in the state database, your district or school email address will validate your access, and that'll get you in. So once you're in, then we now the system now allows school level user accounts. So those of you who are direct funded charters or NPS school administrators to create additional user accounts at the school level. So that's helpful for filling out information. So it should just be streamlined. Then each fall, this prior SARC user accounts will expire. So an annual registration will be required, and the annual registration will ensure that new superintendents, as well as direct funded charter and NPS school administrators, have immediate access to the online SARC web application system. So there's not a missing access that's been a problem in the past. Next slide, please. In addition, there's some changes coming to the Find a SARC page. The CDE just announced this last week. It's developed a more user-friendly search method, and they've added links to the homepage to provide the public with easy and convenient access to general SARC information. This will include some resource pages, quick access to many of the SARC-related resources, as well as a Contact Us feature that will provide quick and easy method to send an email to the SARC team. Next slide, please. So here's a quick look in the background. You can see that's what the Find a SARC currently looks like. And the new homepage is in the foreground. That's currently in development, and they didn't give a timeline, but it looks like it's getting close to implementation. Next slide, please. And here's a quick look at the other features. On the left, you'll see what the search feature will now look like, as well as this summary page, which is nice. Before, you had to either click the link to go to, if someone upload a link to go to the SARC, or download a PDF. This will give you a quick summary of the SARC information online. Next slide, please. So as I noted earlier, the CDE sent an email in November to district and LEA superintendents, charter school administrators related to the per pupil expenditure reporting application, which is part of the LEA accountability report card. And we've included a screen capture here of the letter that was sent to LACO. So in the event that you're concerned that this didn't get to somebody or that it got lost in your superintendent email inbox, you can help track it down. The date would have been mid-November. And like I said, this email included a username and password for LEAs to access the input page for the LEA accountability report card. And I have some additional information. It's likely that your fiscal people will be handling the per pupil expenditures. It really is coming out of the CDE's fiscal department. But we have some additional resources that I'll share in just a minute that you can share with those people or whoever will be taking care of the LEA accountability report card. Next slide, please. So the LEA accountability report card does have a couple new features. So the school improvement funds, that's a comprehensive school improvement funding, will be included within the LEA accountability report card if your LEA is receiving any of that funding. Also, this per pupil expenditure data that is a federal requirement as part of ESSA, and the calculation, the process for calculating is what that previous slide was referencing. So how to enter all that data. There also will be student achievement data in the areas that are being calculated. High school graduation rates, which is reported on DataQuest, state performance on the NAEP, and educator qualifications, which included and have included in the past level of teacher education. Next slide, please. So the CDE will be holding 3 ESSA per pupil expenditure webinars. These are not posted on the CDE website, by the way, so make sure that for reference, send this slide forward to whoever you think should be getting this information. Each webinar covers the same information, so you would only have to attend one time, and each webinar is scheduled to run for an hour from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And the links are included on this slide. Next slide, please. And finally, just some information in general about the LEA accountability report card. This is from the CDE's website. So you can see the original letter that went out in 2018 that explained the per pupil expenditure reporting requirement and gives some greater detail if you want to understand a little bit more, and you can forward that to any fiscal staff who may be calculating that for you. Also the ED's non-regulatory guidance, and then the CDE's local education, the LARC report card homepage. Next slide, please. And finally, the STARC. The STARC is the state's accountability report card, and they actually cull all data from all the LEAs, and they will also be reporting out on the school improvement funds. And they gather student achievement data from across the state, including high school graduation rates, performance on the NAEP, as well as a summary statewide of educator qualifications. Next slide. So for additional information, there are links here for the LEA report card, the SARC, the Find a SARC webpage, as well as the state accountability report card page. And then there is a an email address, which is sarc@cde.ca.gov that I meant to include here, but it's listed on the SARC webpage, and you can email them if you have additional questions. Next slide. So wrapping up here, we just have a couple of updates and reminders. We just want to remind you there are some required web postings, and we just want to make sure, because we know that you've been really busy. There's been a lot flying at you, but LEAs are required to post in a prominent place their learning continuity plan, their budget overview for parents, and by the way, for both the LCP and the BOP, please post the most recent version. So if you've made any changes to the LCP or the BOP, be sure to post those prominently on your website and upload them to the LCAP site. So we have the most recent to share on our outward facing link for all our LEAs. And that's for districts. Also your LCAP federal addendum. And if you have a CSI school within your LEA, or if you are an LEA that's received CSI, you'll need to post your CSI prompts. It falls in line with the LCAP requirements. That would have been part of the LCAP, so you need to post those. Also, there's some upcoming dates for CSI reporting and GMART, and if you can keep the years straight, I'd be impressed. But there is a due date, February 28th, is the reporting for both the 2019-20, the report 2, and the 18-19 report 6. So you got a waiver that extended the CSI funding from the 18-19 school year, so that there's a report due for that year still. And both of those will be required in your February 28th. And finally, our next state and federal program directors meeting will be held online on Thursday, February 18th at 10 a.m. Same bat place, same bat channel. And as we roll out here, just a reminder, we are recording this. We'll get it posted within the next 24 hours or so. If you have additional questions, please put those in the chat. We will send out our Q&A within 48 hours of all your questions. We had quite a few today, so we like to give a thorough and well-considered response to all of your questions. So look for that. That'll be sent out to the listserv of everyone who's registered for this. And that is it. Just a quick reference to all of our contact information. If you have any questions, be sure to email us at sfp@laco.edu, and we'll get back to you as quickly as possible. Thank you for joining us today, and stay safe.